anytime or anywhere at all. Rain or sunshine, spring or fall, you never know when it may say hello in a very unexpected place. For example, take my case.
Oh, some people want perfect diction and accurate grammar. I'm going to talk the language that you and I understand.
His name is Fiorello H. La Guardia, affectionately known as the Little Flower. New York City has never seen another mayor quite like him.
I'd rather split an infinitive than split an idea.
Hello, I'm Fred Noriega.
I'm Marie Torre. Fiorello La Guardia was mayor of New York City for 12 years, through 1945. There have been 6 other mayors since he died. But here it is, 100 years since he was born, December 11th, 1882, and we're still talking about him. Why? History tells us that he embraced more of the qualities we admire in leaders than others of his time.
Fiorello La Guardia was, in other words, an original. And just as museums offer inspirational scrutiny of a work of art, this program offers an intimate view of a remarkable kind of mayor who believed with his heart and soul in government of the people, by the people, for the people.
Fiorello reminds me of a story of Michelangelo working on Christmas Eve. It was snowing. One of his pupils came in and saw the old man hammering away with the chips flying. And he said, "Master, what are you doing?" And such was the fury of creation upon old Michelangelo that without ceasing, with the chips still flying, he shouted back, "I'm freeing the man on this rock." And to me, that was Fiorello freeing the people who were caught in the social system.
Ernest Cuneo, LaGuardia's one-time law secretary and lifelong friend, remembers the intensity of his boss's commitment to human and civil rights before his mayoral days, when he was known as Congressman LaGuardia.
LaGuardia was determined to free the people in this country, and believe me, they needed some freedom. Pennsylvania was a fascist state. Miners, some of them saw the sun. A steel worker worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they were beaten up if they attempted to form a union. And that's how the Norris-LaGuardia Act came into being, which is the forerunner of the Wagner Act, which allowed for the organization of labor.
LaGuardia's compassion for the working man and the unprotected is perhaps rooted to his own beginnings. He was born in a tenement in Greenwich Village, New York on December 11, 1882. His parents were of Italian and Jewish descent, and since their arrival here 2 years earlier, their dream of a prosperous life, like that of many other immigrants, eluded them. But when Fiorello's father joined the U.S. Army as a bandmaster and moved his family to Prescott, Arizona, their condition improved somewhat. The mistreatment of Indians and contempt shown towards foreigners in Prescott were disturbing sights to young Fiorello, and so were multitudes of unemployed miners and factory workers beset by hunger and hopelessness and who were snubbed by the government. Fiorello's outrage carried over to later years when the aspiring mayoral candidate returned to New York and saw Tammany manipulate the poor for their own political purposes without improving conditions.
Tammany Hall is the New York County Democratic Machine, an organization that was geographically decentralized, had a ward system. People would be rewarded with services in exchange for their votes.
NYU political science professor Bob Pecorella says, despite rampant graft and corruption in the Tammany-dominated government, the time was not right for Fiorello when he made his first mayoral bid as an anti-machine candidate in 1929.
Things were well. The 20s were a boom period, if only on paper. Jimmy Walker was a very popular mayor. Tammany Hall had been in power for a long time, and there wasn't the demand for change that came about after the '29 stock market crash began to affect New York City. The realization that Tammany Hall could no longer fulfill the social service needs of people, that the game of trading services for votes couldn't do it anymore with 25% unemployment or something like that. LaGuardia recognized that, and as a strong political leader, an effective political leader, he responded to it and shaped New York City's response to that.
And so in 1933, With no political party to call his own, but with a coalition of various groups to lend their support, the reformed Bent LaGuardia won the election, handily beating out his Tammany opponent.
Fiorello H. LaGuardia, do solemnly swear.
At midnight on January 1st, 1934, 51-year-old Fiorello LaGuardia took the oath of office.
That I do.
1 minute later, the new mayor ordered the arrest of Lucky Luciano, one of the most infamous gangsters of his day. "È finita la cuccagna," he called to reporters in Italian as he ascended the city hall steps his first day. "No more graft, no more free lunches. The party is over." Fiorello began his term like an inconquerable thoroughbred bolting from the starting gate.
It was an explosive, exciting time. His personality was so magnetic and his activity was so dynamic and so many-sided that you began to feel it was almost like a vibration you could feel through the city.
Friend and former aide Ira Hirschman, who shared a love of music with the mayor, appreciated the tempo of those early days.
Early in the morning, he would dash up the stairs when he got out of his little car and start almost dictating on the way up. And they would have 4 or 5 girls, and he'd start collecting them and talking fast to each one. Here, take this call, take this to this one, and take this to this one. Don't you hear me? He was not the typical executive in the sense of having everything in apple pie order, but somehow he got more done than any 3 men I ever saw.
The city was broke. Untold millions had been stolen or frittered away on thousands of unnecessary municipal jobs dispensed to the faithful or the highest bidder. Fiorello was determined to trim the fat, make the city solvent, and take advantage of President Roosevelt's New Deal, a strong federal program which allotted funds towards bettering the conditions of those in need. LaGuardia founded a city housing authority and empowered it to tear down hundreds of rat-infested slums and build new low-cost housing projects. He established civil service and welfare assistance programs and health clinics. He broke ground for new playgrounds, parks, and schools, tunnels, bridges, and highways. The little man in the rumpled suit was on hand for fires, processions, and raids. He even joined in the sledgehammer destruction of hundreds of slot machines confiscated from racketeers. While there were those who were put off by their mayor's theatrics, his 84-year-old widow Marie thought they were
wonderful. What do you expect? Sometimes they said he wasn't being dignified enough. Fiorello used to say it takes more than dignity to run a city like New York.
He used to say, hey, on Judgment Day, we'll be judged not on what we did, but what we didn't do. Because your sin is the difference between what you actually did and what you might have done had you tried to help your fellow man.
By the beginning of his second term, Fiorello La Guardia had come closer to being all things to all people than any other New York City mayor before or after. To music lovers, the little flower emerged as the patron of free public concerts, who took delight in conducting sometimes, reminding one and all that he just wanted to be treated like Toscanini. To the poor and needy of New York, LaGuardia was the savior who instituted welfare, providing cash relief to the unemployed, as former Mayor Abe Beame recalls.
It was a very refreshing thing for the people to feel they had somebody in that office whom they had confidence in and who was wrapped up in their problems.
For those who demanded responsible government, LaGuardia instituted civil service, which put city employees on a merit rather than patronage system, killing Tammany's appetite for political payoff jobs.
One of the things he's best noted for and best remembered for, and rightfully so, is the development of civil service in New York City, merit appointment.
LaGuardia was all things to the capitalists, too, for they prospered through his many building programs, notable among them the World's Fair of 1939, and his pride, LaGuardia Airport. It was over breakfast, Ira Hirschman recalls, that he first heard LaGuardia talk about creating an airport on the site of Jamaica Bay.
And he pushed the dishes aside and took one of his papers. He always had a big pencil in there, big black or red pen, and he scribbled on and said, here's the way I see that airport, like that, and started design it on to Marie's discomfiture, like that. And he said, you know, let's jump in the car now and go out and look at the place. I can just see the whole picture of what that's going to be. And so we jumped in the car, and Marie kept running after, and as we were running out, and she grabbed, I said, Marie, save that tablecloth. That's going to be history.
To show people, LaGuardia was savvy enough to hold his own among the best of them, such as this impromptu moment at City Hall with Abbott and Costello.
I understand you've visited 21 states, 80 cities, and sold $70 million worth of bonds.
So they tell us. Somewhere's around it.
I bet that guy Hitler doesn't like you. I'll bet I don't like him. That makes it fair.
And to the children of New York City, LaGuardia was the nice mayor who couldn't see them deprived of the Sunday comics when the newspapers went on strike.
Here's Dick Tracy. Let's see what Dick Tracy is doing. Now, you remember, we hear wet wash. Listen, baby, I know you're a maid at Van Hoosen's. I saw you there last week. And I know there's something phony about that dough. Now, when we get it, it's going to be 50-50.
LaGuardia loved children. After the premature death of his first wife and their only child, he married his secretary, Marie Fisher, and they adopted 2 children, Eric and Jean. Comedian Joey Adams, who met LaGuardia as a child, has for years called himself another of LaGuardia's adopted children.
I was about 6 or 7 years old, making a speech on a corner, 104th Street and Madison Avenue, East Harlem. And in those days, instead of imitating Al Jolson or Frank Sinatra or Bob Hope, we used to imitate street-corner politicians. And a little man joined the other kids, and he's listening to me. He had a big black hat, cigar, and he's listening to me yelling and screaming, proletariat, shoulder to shoulder with the working man. When I was all finished, he beckoned me with his finger. He said, young man, I like your sentiments. He brought me to campaign headquarters. He said, this is my assistant. And I would seal the letters or stamp them and take them to the post office, go out and get the corned beef sandwiches.
While Adams was still a teenager, LaGuardia managed to get a club booking for him in Baltimore during Christmas. Adams flopped, he recalls, and retreated to his hotel room in tears. At about midnight, Adams heard heavy knocking on the door.
I opened the door, and there was the entire cast, the stagehands, the crew, the musicians, and LaGuardia, right front, with packages of the sky, with turkeys and hams and fruits and candies. This tiny little guy, the package was with twice his size, and all the entire crew around him. He said, happy birthday, son. Merry Christmas.
Early in his second term, LaGuardia entertained notions of succeeding Franklin Roosevelt as president. Then, early in 1940, a shattering end to the dream. President Roosevelt, alarmed by Hitler's trampling of weaker European nations, announced he would seek a third term. LaGuardia changed his objectives, as former Mayor Robert Wagner recalls.
He was very anxious to become a general. He was ready to give up his mayoralty, and he, I think, lost that opportunity one time in between a visit from the White House over to the munitions building to see Secretary Stimson. Something happened along the way, and he didn't get the appointment.
Eventually, Washington granted LaGuardia the post of Director of Civilian Defense, which he undertook while continuing his mayoral duties. He might have been given an A for effort, but the results were less than impressive. He was replaced as head of civilian defense after it was criticized as chaos from the start. It's possible that Washington was unaware that LaGuardia achieved through a system which others perceived as chaos. Former Mayor John Lindsay recalls visiting LaGuardia's office as a high school student.
We stood in the back of the room of what is now known as the Blue Room. And Mayor LaGuardia was behind the LaGuardia desk. And he was yelling at everybody, yelling his head off. There were commissioners standing around, and he was screaming his head off, and we were very impressed.
So why would that impress you?
Because it was chaos, seeing all these milling people, and here was this famous man who'd read the funny papers. And he was just shouting at everybody who would stand there and listen.
Listen and get the job done. But before the end of the third term, there appeared to be less and less public appreciation of LaGuardia. Had he spread himself too thin? Had he grown weary of local politics? Or had time run out for what had been a perfect match? A depressed New York City and an impassioned mayor.
In his 12 years of office, Mayor LaGuardia never took a vacation. He was tired and he longed for a change. Moreover, he realized that after 3 productive terms, his base of support had eroded considerably.
Popularity is something that quickly goes when one begins to make decisions. You begin to alienate small groups of people here or there, and people tend to act on their negative feelings more than they do on perhaps their positive feelings. So an effective political leader will, by the very nature of the beast, lose popularity. LaGuardia, as a very effective political leader, involved in making some substantive changes in New York City government, is alienating a lot of people. And over the course of 12 years, it would be amazing if he didn't alienate people.
Fiorello did not run for a 4th term. And on January 1, 1946, after having served 4,383 days in office, New York's crusading 99th mayor packed it all in, turned the reins of power over to Democrat William O'Dwyer, and bid a sweet farewell to friends and well-wishers. Scarcely 3 months after leaving office, LaGuardia was appointed Director General of the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, an organization charged with providing worldwide emergency relief to those in need. As usual, the feisty humanitarian put his heart and soul to the task at hand.
People are asking for bread, not advice. People need relief, not sympathy. I need plows, not typewriters.
While this job was to cap off a lifetime of public service, it's LaGuardia's achievements as New York's most dynamic mayor that will be best remembered. He left in his stead a host of social service programs in a budding metropolis. During his tenure, he built 60 schools, including the High School of Music and Art, 260 playgrounds, and several housing projects. The East River Drive, the Queens Midtown Tunnel, the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, the Triborough Bridge, the Bronx Whitestone Bridge, the list goes on. He made New York a major aviation center by building what came to be known as LaGuardia Airport, and began construction on another airway, later to be named Kennedy International. And he established a tone for all succeeding mayors, including the current one, Ed Koch.
He set the standard of excellence for all mayors in the modern era, and that every mayor has to try to get as close to his standard as is possible, recognizing that we'll never reach it.
How is the impact or the mark of Fiorello LaGuardia felt today?
Well, it's felt in terms of New York City still being a city, after all we've gone through for the last 8 years, still being a city that recognizes an obligation, a social obligation to people who need help for upward mobility.
I think his legacy to the city of New York was to demonstrate that a leadership of integrity and imagination and concern for the people first in areas of education, cleanliness, the arts, and honest government were capable of being put into motion.
With all his accomplishments, the final measure of his greatness lies in the esteem felt by countless citizens, even now.
I only hope that during my lifetime we should have another mayor like him.
He wasn't all about big business. He was about just relating to human beings.
Everything he did was very warm and on almost like a personal basis.
He cared. He had compassion. And this in a time when we had a depression that was overwhelming.
Fabulous guy. Little in body, but big in spirit and heart.
Fiorello LaGuardia died about 20 months after he surrendered the reins of mayor to William O'Dwyer. And he said as he did so, it's not good to stay in office too long. Those who do become bossy. and they tell me I'm sort of inclined that way at times. Indeed, he was the boss, the paternal curator of the New York City he loved, and conversely, the city that loved him. If, as Samuel Butler once wrote, he is greatest who is most often in men's good thoughts, there can be no doubt that LaGuardia was the greatest. For today, 35 years after his death, there are still big memories of the little flower.
I follow the old rule that a man has given me much if he's given me something to love. I loved him. Everybody did.
He said, don't worry about people knowing you. Make yourself worth knowing. Don't show off so much. Show what you really have. Go to work. Don't worry about people knowing you. Make yourself worth knowing. And that stayed with me all my life.
Throughout it all, the tumultuous times, the disorder, the travel, and the sickness, there was one constant, Marie.
In Washington, you were the secretary. Where did it stop being secretary and you started falling in love with Mr. LaGuardia?
I was always more or less in love with him.
Fiorello's passion for music led Ira Hirschman to remember his last profound impression of LaGuardia.
I go up to the home where he had been lying in bed. He was really declining pretty rapidly. I knew his love of music and his love of Jean. I had helped him buy his Steinway piano some years back, and Jean was taking music lessons, and he loved music. And I said to Jean, come downstairs, and let us play some Schubert four-hand pieces. Maybe he would listen and enjoy that. And we'd go to the piano, and he'd come down in a bathrobe and sit on a couch beside, and we would play these Schubert pieces, which were very affecting and very deep. And I was able occasionally to look back and see the luster and this luminous quality in his eyes that I had known for so many years in working with him, when he seemed to be looking upward with great hope and promise. And this return of that quality in his face as we were playing that music, as I would turn back, is a memory that I love to retain.